You know, I really hope the sixth time is a charm because this is the sixth time I've sat down to try and record this video. Hey! What's up guys, Jack here with MTS, and a while back EnGenius reached out to me wanting to send me some stuff to take a look at, and I said yes. And then I sat down to try and make a video about it, and then they changed some things, and then I got some information wrong, and then they changed some more things, and then my opinion changed, and then I did an overly ranty video, and I'm like, that's not right, so you get this now. We're gonna try and meet somewhere in the middle. So when EnGenius reached out to send me some of this stuff, they wanted to send me one of their access points. This is the ECW220 and one of their switches. This is the ECS1008P. I'm just gonna say this right now. This switch is awesome and does not deserve a terrible name like ECS1008P. This access point, pretty decent name. Now this is a Wi-Fi 6 access point. It's a 2x2 MIMO Wi-Fi 6 access point. Now testing this access point on Wi-Fi 6 in the same room as my desktop, I was able to get about 430 megabits per second down. Moving one room away, we drop down to 274 megabits per second, and 2 rooms away, we go down to 157, which makes this fall pretty much right in between the U6 Lite from Ubiquiti and an early access point from Ubiquiti that I can't talk about now, but get subscribed for when I have a full video out once that gets out of EA. Now in terms of the switch, it's basically just an 8-port gigabit managed PoE switch. Now both of these devices can be managed through EnGenius's Cloud, but the switch can be managed locally. It has a full-on web GUI built into it and stuff, so you just connect over its IP address. Now EnGenius's Cloud is good, but I don't like the cloud, so I'm never gonna deploy any of this stuff just because I don't like the cloud. However, this switch is great, and when I'm done with this review, this is going in my new portable audio rack. So just getting that little bit of disclosure out of the way. I am biased against cloud. I like having all of my control local, and for a lot of government contract work, you can't do something like cloud because, well, all of your networking and connection information basically can't leave and phone home to somebody else's servers. So if you're doing anything with the government, this is already off the table. Now, I do genuinely like using EnGenius's cloud platform. It's not difficult to navigate, everything is well laid out, and it pretty much just works. Plug in your access point, it creates a Wi-Fi network that you can use for getting online, and then it creates a second network for configuring the access point. Now, configuration of the access point is essentially just giving it an IP address, changing your DHCP options, adding into a VLAN, things like that, and then displaying your serial number. Because you can't change any of the SSID information or the password without connecting it to their cloud. And connecting it to their cloud is as simple as copying the serial number and pasting it into the Adopt Devices page in their cloud interface. All of the management of their cloud managed access points happens in the cloud. Whereas the switch is a hybrid approach where you can do cloud management or local management. I do appreciate this a lot more than the access point because I don't like cloud, but this switch is actually pretty awesome. 8 ports of PoE 802.3 AF. You can change the status lights to either be PoE lights or network activity lights, and that's done by holding down the button for a couple seconds and then releasing it, and then it changes over. But this switch supports IGMP snooping, green Ethernet, specifically the ability to turn off green Ethernet, VLANs, everything I could want. And I tested this with Dante and it didn't introduce any extra latency. EnGenius's Cloud is in its infancy stages. Currently they have a lot of paid features in their cloud, but those paid features are free. It says that they're a premium feature, but there is no way to pay for them currently. I reached out to EnGenius and they said that hopefully this year or next year they're looking to do a per device license fee for their more premium features. Now, the approach they're really taking is more of a Ubiquiti Cisco Meraki combination where you have your basic features like your Wi-Fi stuff, all your VLANs on your switches, all of your management, and that's all free, similar to Ubiquiti. However, when they start entering that per device license fee, well, that's the Cisco Meraki territory, and unlike Cisco Meraki, with EnGenius Cloud, you don't get any form of support. So there is a gap that needs to be filled. Now that we have the device information out of the way, let's go ahead and hop into the controller interface. All right, so getting started here, I'm connected to the switch's local control interface here, which is at 192.168.1.127 because it grabbed a DHCP IP address from my router. So we can see all of our system informations, DHCP relay, snooping, port settings. You can control all of the ports and disable them, change the mode, flow control, all of that stuff. You also have your PoE budget information, which the total PoE budget is 55 watts of this switch. And then you can come down to energy efficient Ethernet, which I have disabled for all of the ports. And then we can move into the layer 2 features such as IGMP snooping, which is important for things like Dante because that's how it does all of its discovery. So I have IGMP snooping enabled. And then you can also change things like jumbo frames, which for my network, generally I have it set to 9,000 because that's what works best for Unraid and my configuration with all of my computers and everything. But this switch right now is just set to 1522. Then we can move on into our VLAN information where we have 802.1q and we can set up all of our VLANs. So I have VLAN 107 set up as an IoT network on port 6 here, and that's untagged. If we select this, we can come in here and change all of the information about it on whether it's forbidden on a certain port, tagged, untagged, and we have 8 trunk ports which we can use for, well, trunking. We also have our PVID information, which is basically which VLAN is the untagged VLAN for the different ports. So all of my ports right now are set to 1. I don't have the VLAN actually properly set up yet. And then we can come into the management stuff, which is, your system information, user management. So you can create multiple users. You can do dual images on here so you can have multiple partitions. So if you need to create a backup of your configuration and quickly be able to restore it, that's very nice. So say you come into a job site and you don't know really what all the switch settings are, but you know you're having a problem, you can back it up to a different partition on the switch and then make your changes and stuff. And if it doesn't work, well, you can go back to your other partition. Then we can come into our QoS settings where we have basically just a generic QoS management system here. And I haven't had to mess with any of the QoS settings of the switch because generally all of the QoS information that I'm dealing with is for Dante and for VoIP phones. And this just works right out of the box perfectly fine. So I haven't had to mess with any of these settings. We also have our security information where we can configure it with a radius server, access stuff, port security, port isolation, your basic features of a managed switch. So it's nice to see that this switch really has all of the features that you would expect to be here. You also have monitoring stuff like port statistics, so you can see how much traffic is going through different ports, and then diagnostics, your ping tests, logs, trace routes. It's nice that this does have trace routes built into it, so if you're having an issue between getting, a connection from your computer to something beyond the switch, you can use the trace route and the ping test to figure out whether that issue is happening between your computer and the switch, or the switch and whatever is causing an issue. Now that we've taken a look at the switch's local control interface, I'm gonna go ahead and reset this guy to factory defaults and get it adopted into their cloud controller so we can take a look at that. All right, so now we're taking a look at the EnGenius Cloud controller. Now, it says that I have some issues, that I'm using the local credentials to devices. For security concerns, they want me to change it, but I'm not really, this is, you see my issue here? I can't click on this to have it stay up, and I can't get down here to change that. Same thing down here. If you go to the organization area where you have your, see? You have to hover over the icon, then move to the side, then go up. So you can't do this fast. And then same thing with this. Although on this page here for your configuration page, it's a lot less of an issue because, well, you have all of your stuff right next to it versus having to come down here and then go back up. So kind of annoying. EnGenius, please make this not that garbage. So with that out of the way, now let's talk about the actual controller and all of its settings. So we have a dark mode. I know a lot of people like dark mode, so I guess I'll use dark mode for this video. But we have our switches here and our access points. Now I only have that one switch and the one access point, so they're both showing up here as online. So if we take a look at our access points, we can see our ECW 220 V2. I guess there was a V1 of this, and we can click on details. Now in the details page, you can manage all of your SSIDs and turn off the status lights. So if I wanted to turn that off, I can do so and give it a couple seconds to update and the lights turn off. This is pretty useful. I know a lot of people leave the LED settings on, but especially for Uni-Fi devices, the light dims over time. With all the heat created by the access points, I have access points that are just a couple years old and you basically can't see the LED unless you're cupping your hands over it looking really closely at it, because the LED is essentially just dimmed and burned out from all the heat that it's generating. So it's nice to be able to turn off the status lights and then just turn them on when you need them. We can also take a look at our SSID information. I made my SSID, this is bad. I make all of my SSIDs and device names for stuff, the most random, stupid things you can think of. You can also come down here and change your channel, your target power, minimum bit rate, client limit, channel width, and you can discard A, B, and G networking, which is kind of nice. So you can kind of restrict older devices and say, hey, don't use this crap protocol because it's, well, old. You can also come down here and change all of the IP address information for the access point itself and stop it from meshing with other access points. So EnGenius's access points can mesh together the same way that Ubiquiti's access points can. You can also upload a photo here of where the access point is deployed. Maybe you have a label on it or something like that, but it's really nice to be able to say, hey, all right, I know where this location is based on this photo. I can now go find my access point. Now that we've looked at the access point and its settings, let's go ahead and take a look at our switches. Now, the switches page you can get to by clicking on switches, or from the side view here, you can go over to manage and then switches. So we have our ECS1008P switch, seriously that name is terrible, and we can click details. We can see our active ports, we can see link speeds. Now I'm not sure why they give us an option for 2.5, 5, and 10 gig on a device that can't even support that. It would be nice if the controller was aware of the fact that, hey, this switch doesn't support those speeds, and then would hide it in the interface. So that way I'm not potentially thinking, oh, well, why isn't this doing 10 gig? Oh yeah, because it's not a 10 gig switch. We can also see that this port is providing PoE, and by hovering over it, we can reset the PoE on it. We can scroll down here and change the IP address of the switch, as well as upload a photo again of where it might be installed. We can also change the system configuration stuff of the switch itself. So that would be like spanning tree, LLDP, voice VLAN, quality of service stuff, IGMP snooping, jumbo frames, and enabling or disabling the local GUI. Taking a look at the port settings, we basically have the same type of port setting that we had in the local interface, and then we also can do our VLANs and all of that configuration. We can also create a new VLAN here really quickly. I'm gonna make it VLAN 40, and I'm just gonna say, I don't know, gaming. So if I have multiple gaming PCs that I for some reason don't want on my other network, I can do that. And then I can assign it ports. You can also go over to mirror and mirror different ports together, which is nice because if you want to go and Wireshark capture some stuff, say you have a device and you don't know whether it's phoning home to a server in China or something, you can mirror 2 ports on a switch, plug in the device that you're unsure about into one of the ports, and then plug in your computer to the second port and run Wireshark. And that way you can grab all of the network information and figure out what it's trying to send. You can also change the PoE schedule. So say I want to have all these access points or security cameras or IP phones or anything like that turn off at a certain time of day. Well, I can do that here. You also have the ability to manage all of your link aggregation ports by changing the member ports and changing the aggregation type. So I'm going to set it to LACP here, and we're just going to grab ports 1 and 2. I'm not going to save this just because, well, I'm using those ports. We can also then take a look at the logs of the switch itself. Now let's take a look at their topology view. Now with the topology here, we can see that we have our internet connection, and then we have our switch and our access point, and that the access point is connected through this switch. And we can also see which ports it's connected to. So we can see that the internet is coming in on port 1 and the access point is connected via port 2. You also have the ability to enable other devices. I wonder what that would look like. Now, it is a pro feature, and the pro features are free right now if I enable them. I'm not going to do that because, quite frankly, when they become paid features, I'm never going to pay a monthly or yearly subscription to continue using features on a device that I paid money for. So I have no interest in even taking a look at these settings because they're nothing I would ever want to use in the future. So now let's jump into the configuration of something like the SSIDs. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on add an SSID, and we're just going to create a new one called MTS testing. And we can enable it, hide it, set our radios, whether it's 2.4, 5, or 2.4 and 5, and we can change our password. So I'm not going to use the suggested password, I'm going to just make it password because I don't care about my security. You can also set up the password based off of user accounts, whether you bring that in through a Radius server or anything like that, but that is a pro feature. Again, something that I don't really care about. Even though it's a really cool thing, it's not something I believe I should have to pay in order to use. We can also change the client IP addressing mode from bridge mode to NAT. Now switching it to NAT mode would basically mean that the access point would run its own DHCP server that it would then assign IP addresses to clients with. And bridge mode is basically your router or whatever else you have acting as your DHCP server is assigning the IP addresses. You can also change the VLAN here. So if we enable the VLAN, and I'm just going to set this to that gaming VLAN that we made, you can also set up client VLAN pooling. I don't really know what this means, but it's a pro feature, so will. And moving on to the advanced settings, we can enable L2 isolation, band steering, and BCMC suppression, which again is one of those pro features. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on apply, and it's going to create our Wi-Fi network for us. We can also change the bandwidth limit on either per client or per SSID. We can also do them both at the same time. So if we want each user to only be able to use a certain amount of data, but then the overall network or SSID can only use a certain amount of data, so each user can use 10 down, 1 up, but the entire network as a whole can only use 100 down and 10 up. That would basically restrict me to 10 users of full capacity based off of my limitations that I've set, but it's a good feature to have in order to make sure that your network here isn't interfering with maybe a limited bandwidth internet connection that you might have. So you still have plenty of bandwidth left for maybe a VoIP Wi-Fi network, so that way you can make sure that, well, calls always have a set amount of bandwidth and everything else is limited to a certain range. You can also change your captive portal settings, so you can enable a captive portal and that's just click through, custom radius, voucher service. You have a bunch of options here, and you can also set up redirection. You also have a splash page, which is where people get to when they come into the captive portal. I'm going to disable that though. You can also set up your SSID on a schedule, so it's only active for a certain time of day. Say your guest's network is only available during business hours or lobby hours. You also have access control where you can block certain MAC addresses, and you have VIP list, which basically says, hey, you are always going to be allowed. Now let's take a look at the overall VLAN settings. We can see our gaming VLAN that we set up, the IoT network that I set up ahead of time, and our voice VLAN, again, that I set up ahead of time. And this is kind of annoying. You can't set whether this is the voice VLAN from this page. You have to do that through the other pages, which is kind of annoying. And this gives you just the same options of saying, hey, VLAN ID 50, testing. You don't really get the ability to specify ports or anything from this page. So not necessarily a big fan of that. We can also come over here to our switch settings and change our overall switching settings. So overall, any switch that gets brought into our network, unless we override the settings, will get these settings applied to it by default. So we have spanning tree, LLDP, and we can then enable voice VLAN. So we can set our voice VLAN to VLAN 10, which I made off camera, and then we can change its QoS priority. Coming down here, we can also adjust the QoS settings overall, and then we can also enable IGMP snooping. So I'm gonna enable V2 IGMP snooping, and you can also change that per VLAN, which that is pretty cool. You can then also enable your jumbo frames here. So if I want to set this to what my main network is, which is 9,000, I have the ability to do that from here. We can also take a look at the general settings. Now this is kind of cool. So if we come over to access point here, we can change what it says if we block a client. So this is kind of cool. So instead of saying you have been blocked, I can change this to say, please contact Jack if you feel like this is an error, or whatever I want it to say. You can also block random MAC addresses and tell them some instructions on how to maybe get online or how to contact you. Please reach out to Miller Media to gain access, or whatever I wanted to say. So that's pretty cool. Now, as you can see, the EnGenius Cloud software is pretty robust, and so is the interface for managing the switch if you want to do that locally. But EnGenius has a few other issues. They need to take some time to work out a lot of these quality of life issues. One of those issues that I have is, well, I mean, backup and restore is a pro feature. And when I reached out to EnGenius asking, hey, why the heck is this a pro feature? I don't know any other company that's making backup and restore a paid thing. They said, well, it's in the cloud, so you never really need to back anything up because the controller is all happening in the cloud. But there are a number of reasons why you might want to back up and restore and not have that be a paid feature. Because again, with it being a paid feature, I'm not sure if it's going to be a per device setting that you want to export, because all of their fees are gonna be on a per device basis. I don't know whether they're gonna have it be, if you want any of the paid features, do you have to pay for a license on all of your devices, or do you just pay a license fee for the devices that you want to use those pro features on. I'm not sure because they haven't really said anything about that yet. So I'm not sure if backup and restore is going to be like a one-time payment thing, if I can pay for the pro features on like one device, or if I have to buy a license for all of my devices just to export that configuration. And there are a number of reasons why you might want to do something like that. Say you're an MSP like me. Well, say I move out of the area and I can't really service that one store that I have that has only a couple of access points. It's not worth my time or my money to fly out to then just be able to reconfigure or mess around with any of those access points. They might need to go with a different MSP, or say I get out of the MSP business altogether. Well, it'd be really nice for me to export my site and then give it to the new MSP so they can import it without having to use my account or me having to hand over my account to somebody else. I can just export the settings and they can import them, similar to the way that a Unify controller would work. I mean, the second big reason is the cloud isn't perfect. I mean, petabytes and petabytes of people's data have been lost due to entire data centers going up in flames. Well, if that happens, it would sure be nice for me to have a backup on my computer of my controller settings for everything. Another thing that leaves kind of a bad taste in my mouth is EnGenius has two lines of products. They have their cloud managed products, which is weird because they have their cloud managed products and then they have their local managed products. And there's a bit of overlap, especially with the switches, because the switches can be managed both locally or through the cloud if you buy the cloud switches. And then if you buy the local switches, they can only be managed locally. And if you buy the cloud access points, well, they can only be managed through the cloud. And if you buy the local access points, well, they can be managed locally or through EnGenius's SkyKey. Now, you can also import your local switches into their SkyKey platform. It's called EnGenius EasyMaster. The SkyKey is basically their little hardware appliance that can run it, similar to the way that Ubiquiti has the Unify controller, and then they have the Cloud Key, which runs it. But the SkyKey and EnGenius EasyMaster is absolutely abominable. If you look at the name that they ripped off, which is, the Cloud Key, well, with the Cloud Key and the Unify controller, I can manage just about every setting on every network device that I have that's a Unify device. It's my one pane for managing everything. But if you look at what the EnGenius SkyKey and their EasyMaster software can do, well, it allows you to create Wi-Fi networks. That seems pretty useless to me. They also list out all the devices' IP addresses, so when you click on it, it'll then take you to the IP address of the device, so that way you can then get in and do all of your local management that way. You can't even change VLANs or any switch settings through EasyMaster. It's basically useless. So it's a bit of a weird balance here because you have basically the same hardware. I would put money on the fact that this cloud access point is the same hardware that's their local version, just with a firmware restriction. So it seems like EnGenius is really trying to just divide people in a way that isn't really necessary, because say I buy into their local managed platform and then say, hey, if I want to get more access points, well, then I'll move up to the SkyKey. Well, I buy more access points, I buy a SkyKey, and then I realize just how useless EasyMaster is. So, all right, I'll just move to their cloud platform because it's a much more robust system. Well, now I have to buy all new hardware. So it's just one of those things it leaves a bad taste in my mouth. And then they also have a few other quality of life issues with their devices. So if I take a look at the back of the access point here, it tells me that the input rating for the DC input, because this can be powered by 802.3 AF PoE or a DC input jack, it tells me that the input rating is 12 volts at 1.5 amps. Very useful. But it doesn't tell me what type of PoE it takes. I have no idea based on reading this. The only way I know that it takes 802.3 AF PoE is because I tested it with a BT switch, an AT switch, and AF is the lowest thing that it worked with. So if I were to just pick this up and not know anything ahead of time and not want to, plug it into a bunch of different types of PoE, well, I would have no idea whether it's 24 volt passive, 48 volt passive, whether it's running 802.3 AF, AT, BT, you don't know. And then on their switch here, the power supply that it comes with is 54 volts at 1.2 amps. Well, say I lose this power supply. All right, I just need to look at the device and see what power supply do I need to buy as a replacement. Oh wait, it doesn't say anywhere on it. So it just tells me that it needs DC, but what type of DC, what voltage, what amperage, you have no idea. So it's just a lot of little things like that that put a bad taste in my mouth and make it difficult for me to recommend the EnGenius Cloud platform, or their local platform for that matter, because with their local platform you don't have room to upgrade, versus something like TP-Link Omada where all of the devices can be locally controlled. You can then buy their hardware controller later on if you get more devices, or you can run the controller software on your computer, or in the future you'll be able to run it for free in their cloud. So there are already alternatives to EnGenius and their cloud platform and local platform that just seem to make a bit more sense. Which leads me to the gap that they're trying to fill in the market. They're trying to be the Ubiquiti and Meraki combo, because right now we have nothing in between really the Unify and the Cisco Meraki. Now I see what they're doing. It's an ambitious goal, but right now I don't think their platform is mature enough for that yet. I do recommend this switch. This is a great little switch, the ECS1008P PoE Plus managed switch. I'm sorry, this is a PoE Plus switch, not just a PoE switch. But this is a fantastic switch. I enjoy the local management of it, and for a lot of the work that I do, especially in like my audio rack and for my on-the-go production use, I'm not always running an internet connection. So if I need to change a VLAN on the switch, well, I don't always have an internet connection to be able to use the cloud to do that. So having the ability to locally control this is very nice. Unlike the access point, which say I need to change the access point SSID to something for an event for a presenter, or I forget the password and need to get into it to look it up. I can't do any of that without the cloud. So for me, their cloud line of products is not something that I will personally be deploying or using. Editing Jack here, so I was looking up the price of the access point and the switch, that way I could put them into the video, and then I found out that the access point is $299 MSRP. What? I'm sorry, twice the price and half the performance of both TP-Link and Ubiquiti? I was originally going to say they just need to add support to their platform so that way they can justify having people spend a monthly subscription or a yearly subscription per device, similar to the Meraki model, but at twice the price and half the performance, that should just be included at the list price. That changes literally my entire outcome of this video. I do not recommend the EnGenius Cloud access points because you can get twice the performance at half the price from the competition. So when you're doing large-scale deployments, that's either more money in your pocket, a reduced price for your customer, or somewhere in the middle. EnGenius, you really need to go back to the drawing board with this and your pricing. So with that being said, thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and drop a like. If you really liked it and want to see more of me in your subscription feed, well then go ahead and hit subscribe. I'll have a link to the switch in the description below, not that access point because that's overpriced and doesn't perform well enough to justify that. So I'll link to the switch because this switch is absolutely awesome, and at $169, I think that's a fair price for it. But anyway guys, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.